The interspecies academy on Xylos hummed with the dissonant chorus of 1,000 different life forms. Its corridors, carved from living crystal that shifted with the planet's twin suns, echoed with the clicks, chirps, and subvocal rumbles of students from across the galactic compact. It was a place of frantic learning, of cultural exchange, and of the profound, unceasing awkwardness that came with being a teenager, regardless of how many limbs or sensory organs one possessed. Among this vibrant chaos, Kaelin of Xylos felt a familiar flutter of her neuroantennae. She adjusted the satchel slung over her chitinous thorax, her multifaceted eyes scanning the bustling common area for her study group. Kaelin's people, the Xylosians, were insected, with sleek, iridescent carapaces and delicate antennae that could taste the emotional state of the air. Right now, the air tasted of frantic energy, pre-exam anxiety, and the greasy scent of the Grolian food stall. Her gaze landed on Grak, a Grolian exchange student, who was effortlessly holding 3 heavy data slates in one of his 4 powerful, fur-covered arms while gesturing emphatically with the 4th. Grolians were mammalian bipeds, built like boulders covered in coarse, brown fur. They were strong, loud, and possessed a cultural swagger that often bordered on arrogance. "It is simple logic," Grak boomed, his deep voice causing a nearby crystalline planter to vibrate softly. "The soft skins from Sector 769 are physiologically predisposed to be prey. No natural armor, no claws, minimal dentition. Their primary defense is cooperation. How can a species that relies on committee meetings to survive possibly comprehend the primal forces of the universe?" Floating silently beside him was Xyrel, a Qthar. The Qthar were beings of pure energy, contained within crystalline, geometric shells. Xyrel's form was a slowly rotating dodecahedron that communicated through synthesized tones and projected text. A line of shimmering script appeared in the air before it. Statistical analysis suggests a species' success is not solely dependent on individual predatory capabilities. Adaptability is a more significant metric, Grak scoffed. They adapted to be fragile, the subject of their debate shuffled into view. Alex Ryder, the solitary human exchange student. To the assembled aliens, he was a biological curiosity. He was bipedal but disconcertingly symmetrical. His skin was soft and pinkish, prone to changing color with exertion or emotion. His sensory organs were clustered inefficiently on the front of his head, giving him a pathetic field of vision. He lacked the Grolian's brute strength, the Xylosian's environmental senses, and the Qthar's intellectual purity. He was, by all galactic standards, unimpressive. Alex offered a small, hesitant wave. His species' primary method of communication, a complex series of facial muscle contractions, was notoriously difficult for others to interpret. Right now his expression seemed placid, unconcerned. It was his default state. "Hey guys," he said, his voice a flat baritone in the cacophony of alien languages. "Did I miss the briefing for the field trip?" Kaelin clicked her mandibles in a gesture of welcome. "You are just in time, Alex. Instructor Vorlag is about to make the official announcement." She tried to read his emotional state, but as usual, it was a confusing muddle. Humans were broadcasting on a frequency she couldn't quite tune into. It was like listening to static, with occasional, unreadable spikes of emotion. It was one of the many things about him that felt incomplete. Instructor Vorlag, a towering, plant-based life form whose species resembled a sentient mangrove tree, rustled its leafy appendages for attention. Its voice was a low, photosynthetic hum that seemed to emanate from its entire body. "Attention, students of comparative xenobiology," it rasped. "As you know, your final experiential credit for this cycle requires a trip to a Class 4 biosphere. After much deliberation and safety protocol review, the administration has approved a visit to the Cathar Prime Apex Preserve." A ripple of excitement and fear went through the students. The preserve was legendary. It was not a zoo, with domesticated or pacified creatures. It was a sanctuary, a massive, continent-sized habitat where some of the galaxy's most dangerous and successful predators were allowed to live in carefully monitored but otherwise natural environments. It was a place of raw, untamed life. Grak pounded his chest with a meaty fist. "Excellent. A chance to see some real power, not just theories on a data slate. He shot a pointed look at Alex. It will be educational for some. Alex just blinked, his soft, forward-facing eyes betraying nothing. Sounds cool. Do they have a gift shop? Grack groaned, a sound like grinding rocks. Kaylin, however, tilted her head. It was another strange human reaction. Faced with the prospect of observing creatures that could tear a Grolian limb from limb, his primary concern was for trivial commerce. Was it ignorance, or was it something else? Zyral's crystalline form pulsed with a soft, analytical light, recording the exchange without comment. The human was an anomaly, a data point that defied every established biological model. The trip to the preserve, Zyral calculated, would provide a significant amount of new data. It had no idea just how significant that data would be. The transport shuttle descended through the thick, ochre clouds of Cathar Prime, its inertial dampeners working overtime to smooth out the turbulence. The planet's atmosphere was a dense, nitrogen-heavy soup that played tricks with light, making the landscape below shimmer and warp. Alex stared out the viewport, his face pressed against the cool transparasteel. Below them, a vast, swampy jungle stretched to the horizon, a sea of alien vegetation in shades of deep violet and blood red. Steam rose from sluggish rivers, and the air itself seemed to pulse with a low, thrumming energy. "Breathe it in, soft skin," Grack rumbled from the seat beside him, his 4 nostrils flaring. "That's the smell of a world that hasn't been tamed. The air here has teeth." Alex shrugged, unconcerned. "Smells a little like the Florida Everglades back home, just needs more mosquitoes." Grack looked at him, his large, dark eyes wide with incomprehension. He had no reference for Florida or mosquitoes, but the human's casual demeanor was baffling. Every other student on the shuttle was exhibiting signs of heightened alert. Kaylin's antennae were twitching constantly, sampling the strange, predator-rich air. Zyral was running continuous atmospheric and gravimetric scans. Even instructor Vorlag's leaves were curled slightly inward, a defensive posture for its species. But Alex looked like he was on a bus tour to a moderately interesting national park. The shuttle landed with a soft hiss on a massive, Duracrete platform jutting out from a fortified central complex. The preserve's architecture was brutalist and functional, designed less for aesthetic appeal and more for keeping what was outside out. A tall, electrified fence, humming with lethal energy, stretched away in both directions, disappearing into the violet jungle. Their guide, a grizzled Cathar native named Warden Ix, met them at the airlock. He was of a different subspecies than the students were used to. His carapace was scarred and pitted, and one of his 6 limbs had been replaced with a gleaming chrome prosthetic. He moved with the weary caution of someone who had spent a lifetime in close proximity to things that wanted to eat him. "To the apex preserve," he chirped, his voice a dry crackle. "Rule number 1, stay on the designated walkways. Rule number 2, do not tap on the containment fields. Rule number 3, if you hear the emergency sirens, lie flat on the ground and try to look as inedible as possible." He paused, his multifaceted eyes seeming to linger for a moment on Alex. "Some of you may find that easier than others." Grack let out a bark of laughter. Alex just gave a small, noncommittal smile. The tour began. The walkways were elevated, magnetically suspended about 20 feet above the ground, weaving through the massive enclosures. The air was thick with the sounds of the jungle and the smells of alien musk and decay. The first habitat they observed held a pack of skittermaws. They were terrifying creatures, a blur of chitinous limbs and razor-sharp mandibles. They moved with a twitchy, unnatural speed, their 6 red eyes constantly scanning for weakness. They were pack hunters, and as the students watched, the pack coordinated to bring down a large, herbivorous beast, tearing it apart with a chilling efficiency that made several students feel physically ill. "The skittermaws of Kresh," Warden Ix explained, his tone devoid of emotion. "They communicate via high-frequency clicks and pheromonal bursts. Their hunting strategy is based on overwhelming a target through sheer speed and numbers. They have never been successfully domesticated. They view anything that isn't one of them as either a threat or a meal." He spoke. One of the skittermaws, larger than the rest, noticed the observation platform. It broke away from the kill, its head snapping up, its red eyes fixed on the group. With a piercing shriek that vibrated through the walkway, it charged. It sprinted towards them, a horrifying vision of scuttling death, and launched itself at the invisible containment field that separated the enclosure from the walkway. Whump! The creature hit the field with a sickening thud, its impact creating a momentary shimmer of blue energy. It fell back, stunned but undeterred, and began screeching and clawing at the barrier, its aggression palpable even through the field. Several students cried out and stumbled backward. Kaylin felt her own carapace prickle with primal fear. Grack instinctively lowered his stance, his muscles tensed for a fight he could not win. Alex, who had been looking at the information display on the railing, finally looked up. He walked to the edge of the walkway, closer to the raging skittermaw, his curiosity apparently outweighing any sense of self-preservation. He peered down at the creature, his head tilted, and then the strangest thing happened. The skittermaw stopped screeching. It froze mid-snarl, its frenzied clawing ceasing. Its 6 red eyes, which had been burning with mindless rage, were now locked onto the soft, pinkish creature staring down at it. A low, guttural whine escaped its fanged maw, a sound completely alien to its known vocalizations. It took a hesitant step back, then another. Its aggressive posture dissolved, replaced by something that looked disturbingly like apprehension. With one last, confused look at Alex, the apex predator turned and scuttled away, disappearing into the dense undergrowth as if fleeing for its life. Silence fell over the observation platform, broken only by the distant sounds of the jungle. Everyone stared, first at the spot where the skittermaw had vanished, and then at the unassuming human standing at the railing. Did you see that?" Kaylin whispered, her antennae vibrating with confusion. Grack grunted, straightening up. "A fluke. The containment field must have given it a more severe shock than usual. It was disoriented." Warden Ix was staring at Alex with a new, intense scrutiny. "In 30 cycles working this preserve," he crackled slowly, "I have never seen a skittermaw back down from a confrontation. Never." Alex seemed oblivious to the stares. He turned away from the railing and looked at the group. "So what's next?" he asked, his expression as mild and unreadable as ever. Zyral's crystalline form began to glow with a brighter, more focused light. A new variable had been introduced into its calculations, and it was a variable that defied all previous data. The field trip had just become infinitely more interesting. The group moved on, a current of uneasy chatter following them. Grack was loud and dismissive, proposing a dozen different theories for the skittermaw's behavior, each one centered on equipment malfunction or random biological anomaly. But his boisterousness had a brittle edge to it. Kaylin walked closer to Alex, trying to subtly sample the air around him. It was still the same confusing static, but there was something else now, a low, barely perceptible hum, like a machine running so smoothly it was almost silent. Their next destination was the Gloom Stalker enclosure. This habitat was darker, a recreation of a cavernous, subterranean ecosystem lit by bioluminescent fungi. The air was cool and damp, carrying the scent of wet stone and something vaguely metallic. "Gloom Stalker of Nocturne VI is a solitary ambush predator," Warden Ix explained, his voice hushed. The atmosphere of the enclosure seemed to demand it. "It is almost completely silent. It hunts using a combination of infrasound and a highly developed sense of atmospheric pressure. It can sense the displacement of air caused by a living creature's breathing from 100 meters away. Its primary psychological weapon is fear. It enjoys stalking its prey, letting the target's terror build before the final strike." Students huddled closer together on the walkway, which here was enclosed in a transparent tube. Their eyes darted into the oppressive darkness, seeing only the faint glow of the fungi on twisted rock formations. There was no sign of the creature. "Do we know it's even in there?" Grack grumbled, trying to sound brave. "It is aware of us," Zyral projected. "My internal sensors detect minute, rhythmic pressure fluctuations consistent with a large, stealthy organism circling our position." A shiver went through the group. Kaylin's antennae flattened against her head. She could feel it too, a cold, predatory focus directed at them from the shadows. It was a deeply unpleasant sensation, a primal certainty that they were being sized up as a potential meal. It felt like cold oil sliding down her carapace. She saw Grack's fur bristle, his powerful frame coiled with tension. He was strong, but strength was useless against a foe you could not see. The feeling intensified. A faint scraping sound echoed from the darkness to their left, then another from the right. It was toying with them. Alex, however, was squinting into the gloom, his face a mask of concentration. "I think I see it," he whispered, pointing. "Over there by that glowing purple mushroom. See the way the light is bending around something." Everyone followed his gaze. At first, there was nothing. Then, as their eyes adjusted, they could just make out a silhouette, a void in the darkness that was even blacker than the surrounding shadows. It was large, hunched, and utterly still. Two large, pale orbs opened in the center of the silhouette, eyes that seemed to drink the faint light. The predatory pressure they had all felt now had a source, and it was focused on them with a chilling intensity. A low growl, more a vibration in the chest than a sound, emanated from the creature. It uncoiled from the shadows, revealing a sleek, pantherine body covered in scales that absorbed the light. It took a slow, deliberate step forward, its movements unnervingly fluid. It was beautiful and terrifying in equal measure. This was different from the Skittermaw's frenzied rage. This was cold, calculated, intelligent malice. The gloom stalker was savoring their fear. It lowered its head, preparing to charge the transparent tube, to give them the scare of their lives. At that moment, Alex raised his datapad and activated its light function, wanting to get a better look. A simple, focused beam of white light cut through the gloom and fell directly on the Glallam stalker. The reaction was instantaneous and utterly bizarre. The creature didn't flinch or hiss. It recoiled as if it had been physically struck. It let out a choked, whimpering sound, a noise of pure, undiluted terror. The massive predator, the thing that hunted by fear, stumbled backward, its sleek limbs tangling in its haste to retreat. Its luminous eyes, which had been wide with predatory hunger, were now constricted in panic. It scrambled back into the deepest part of the cavern and vanished, the sound of its claws scrabbling on the stone echoing in the sudden silence. The oppressive, predatory feeling that had blanketed the group vanished as if a switch had been flipped. The students stood in stunned silence, the beam from Alex's datapad illuminating an empty patch of cavern floor. "What by the twin suns was that?" Kalen stammered. Grack was speechless. His jaw was slack, his bravado completely gone. He stared at Alex, who was now frowning at his datapad. "Weird," Alex said, turning off the light. "I think the light must have hurt its eyes. It's pretty dark in here." "No," Warden Ix said, his voice a strained crackle. "The gloom stalker is a creature of darkness, yes, but its ocular biology is adaptive. Light does not harm it. At most, it should have been a minor irritant." He took a step closer to Alex, his head tilted. "It wasn't the light it was afraid of. It was you." This time, no one argued. The evidence was undeniable. Two of the most fearsome predators in the known galaxy had reacted to the unassuming human not with aggression, but with fear. Grack looked at Alex's soft hands, his clawless feet, his flat, useless teeth. It made no sense. It was like watching a mountain flee from a pebble. "Correlation is 98.7%. Zyral's text shimmered in the quiet air. "The human presence is the direct causal factor for the anomalous predator behavior." The group dynamic had shifted profoundly. As they continued the tour, the other students kept a respectful, almost fearful distance from Alex. Conversations happened in hushed whispers. Grack, for his part, was completely silent, his huge frame slumped in thought. He kept shooting furtive glances at Alex, his expression a mixture of disbelief and a dawning, terrifying comprehension. They took a break for midday meal paced at a fortified rest area overlooking a vast, grassy plain. Herds of enormous, six-legged grazers moved slowly across the savanna, their placid foraging a stark contrast to the predatory encounters they had just witnessed. Kalen finally worked up the courage to sit across from Alex. Zyral floated over to join them, and after a moment's hesitation, a subdued Grack lumbered over, taking a seat at the end of the bench. "Alex," Kalen began, her mandibles clicking nervously. "The other creatures, the Skittermaw and the Gloom Stalker, they seemed afraid of you." Alex was unwrapping a nutrient bar that smelled faintly of synthesized apple and cinnamon. "I don't see why," he said with a shrug. "I didn't do anything." "Is the anomaly," Zyral stated, its synthesized voice calm and precise. "Your inaction is what makes the phenomenon scientifically compelling. Their reaction appears to be instinctual, not a response to a perceived threat. It paused, its form pulsing. I have been accessing the compact's historical and biological archives on your species. The data is limited. Humanity is a relatively new addition, and your homeworld, Earth, is classified as a Class 7 paradise world. Mild climate, low radiation, stable gravity. On paper, your environment is not one that would typically produce a high-tier predatory species. Finally spoke, his voice low and gravelly. On paper. But what does the paper leave out? A great deal, it would seem, Zyril replied. For example, your primary sensory organs, your eyes. They are binocular, forward-facing. In 99.9% of documented species, this is a universal trait of a predator. Prey species have eyes on the sides of their heads for a wider field of view to spot threats. Took a bite of his bar. Yeah, that's so we can have depth perception, for, throwing things. And seeing what we're chasing. The three aliens stared at him. Chasing, Kalen repeated faintly. Sure, Alex said, chewing thoughtfully. That's how we used to hunt. We're not the fastest, but we're the best at long distances. We just pick one animal out of a herd and run after it. For hours, days sometimes, we just don't stop. Eventually it gets tired and overheats and we catch it. Grak's massive head tilted. You hunt by making your prey tired? The concept was so alien, so absurd, that he couldn't grasp it. A Grolian hunt was a thing of explosive violence, of strength against strength over in minutes. Persistence hunting, Zyril's text flashed. An endurance-based predation strategy. The archives make a brief mention of it. It is exceedingly rare. Most ecosystems favor ambush or pursuit predation over short distances. A creature that can simply keep going is a biological anomaly. Zyril's form rotated slightly. Furthermore, your species developed projectile weaponry very early in its evolution. Spears, arrows. This requires advanced depth perception and hand-eye coordination. It implies a predatory instinct to engage targets from a distance, a trait shared by some of the most effective hunters in the galaxy. Finished his bar and wadded up the wrapper. My grandpa used to say the most dangerous thing in the woods wasn't the bear or the cougar, but the quiet little guy in hiking boots who could walk for 10 hours without a break. Kalen tried to process this. The image of this soft, fragile-looking creature relentlessly tracking a much larger, faster animal across a vast plain, simply waiting for it to collapse from exhaustion, was more terrifying than any quick, violent kill. The Skittermaw was a creature of frantic, explosive energy. The Gloom Stalker relied on a sudden, terrifying strike. What would they make of a predator that didn't use speed or stealth, but sheer, indomitable stamina? A predator that simply would not give up ever. So, they look at you, Grak said slowly, the pieces clicking into place in his mind with the force of a tectonic shift. And they don't see a soft skin. They see something that will follow them to the ends of the world. They see the finish line. An interesting hypothesis, Zyril noted. It is possible that apex predators, creatures whose entire existence is based on calculating energy expenditure versus reward, can recognize a persistence hunter on a primal level. They understand that a chase, even if they are faster, is a chase they will ultimately lose. It is a battle of attrition, and your species is biologically engineered to win those battles. Your bipedal gait, your unique heat dissipation system through perspiration, your metabolic efficiency, it all points to a creature designed for endurance above all else. A heavy silence descended on the table. The way they looked at Alex had changed completely. He was no longer the class curiosity, the weak link. He was something else entirely, something ancient and formidable, wrapped in a deceptively harmless package. Alex, for his part, seemed a little uncomfortable with the sudden, intense scrutiny. Guys, it's not that big a deal. We mostly just order pizza now. The aliens weren't listening. They were reevaluating every interaction they'd ever had with him. His placid nature wasn't weakness. It was the quiet confidence of a creature that had no natural predators. His awkwardness wasn't social ineptitude. It was the difficulty of an apex predator trying to fit in with a herd of prey animals. They had been judging a deep ocean leviathan by its ability to climb a tree. The final enclosure of the day loomed before them, its presence dominating the landscape. It was an enormous, domed structure, far larger and more heavily fortified than any of the others. Warning signs in multiple galactic languages flashed along its perimeter, displaying symbols for biohazard, extreme aggression, and existential threat. "And this," Warden Ix said, his voice dropping to a somber, respectful tone, "is the reason this preserve exists. Habitat 7, home of the last known Grav Ripper." Even Grak let out a low whistle of awe and fear. The Grav Ripper was a creature of myth, a living weapon spoken of in hushed tones by spacers and soldiers across the galaxy. It was rumored to be semi-sentient, malevolent, and possessed a unique biological ability to manipulate localized gravity fields, allowing it to move with impossible speed and crush its victims without ever touching them. It is the only known species to have evolved to Level 3 predatory status. Instructor Vorlag hummed, its leaves rustling with what might have been academic excitement or sheer terror. It is not just a hunter of organisms, it hunts ecosystems. A single Grav Ripper, if released on an unprepared world, could cause a total biomass collapse within a single planetary cycle. The observation area was a thick, transparent dome that looked down into a deep, rocky canyon. The canyon floor was a litter of massive, splintered bones, the remains of the Grav Ripper's meals. The air itself felt heavy, distorted. For a long time they saw nothing. The canyon was silent and still. The tension was a living thing, coiling in the stomachs of every student. They were looking into the lair of a monster, a god of destruction. Then a shadow detached itself from the deeper shadows of a cavern. It was huge, far larger than the stories suggested. Its body was a nightmarish fusion of reptilian and insectoid features, covered in thick, obsidian plating that seemed to absorb the light. It had 4 powerful legs and 2 smaller, raptorial arms tipped with claws that looked like surgical steel. Its head was long and armored, and its mouth was a lipless gash filled with rows of serrated, metallic-looking teeth. But its eyes were the worst part. They were not the simple, hungry eyes of a beast. They were intelligent, ancient, and filled with a cold, absolute contempt for all other forms of life. The Grav Ripper looked up at the observation dome. It saw the small, soft creatures staring down at it, and it did something no other animal in the preserve had done. It smiled. A low-frequency hum emanated from the creature, and the observation dome began to vibrate. The lights flickered. A hairline crack appeared in the transparasteel with a sharp ping. "It's testing the field," Warden Ix shouted, fumbling for the comms unit on his belt. "It's never done this before. It's actively trying to breach containment." Panic erupted. Students screamed and scrambled away from the viewport. The humming intensified, and the very air in the dome seemed to thicken, pressing down on them. The Grav Ripper below raised one of its raptorial claws, and the space around it warped. It was gathering its energy for a focused strike. It wasn't just trying to scare them, it was trying to get in. It was trying to kill them. In the midst of the chaos, Alex stood his ground. He wasn't looking at the crack in the dome or the panicking students. He was looking at the Grav Ripper. His face, usually so mild and unreadable, was set in a hard, unfamiliar expression. His body was still, but it was the stillness of a compressed spring. Kalen, huddling behind a console, saw the change in him. The confusing static of his emotional state was gone. In its place was a single, clear, piercing note. It was an emotion she had no name for, but it felt like cold iron and relentless focus. It was the feeling of a predator that has just been challenged by another. The Grav Ripper sensed it too. Its head snapped up, its intelligent eyes locking onto Alex. The contempt in its gaze faltered, replaced by a flicker of confusion. It saw the soft skin, the lack of claws, the pathetic little teeth. But it also saw something else. It saw the forward-facing eyes, the predator's gaze, now fixed on it without a trace of fear. Alex did something then that defied all logic, all sense of self-preservation. He took a step forward, right up to the vibrating transparasteel. He raised his hand and pressed his palm flat against the glass, directly in the Grav Ripper's line of sight. He didn't shout. He didn't make a threatening gesture. He just stared. He met the monster's gaze, and he did not look away. It was the stare of his distant ancestors on the plains of Africa, facing down a cave lion over a fresh kill. It was the stare of a species that had clawed its way to the top of its world's food chain not with fang or claw, but with rocks, sharpened sticks, and a brain that knew how to kill. It was a gaze that held the ghost of 10,000 generations of hunting, of tracking, of outlasting and outthinking every other predator on its planet. It was a gaze that said, without a sound, I see you. You are my prey. The Gravripper froze. The low hum that vibrated through the dome ceased. The pressure on the air vanished. The creature's malevolent smile slackened. Its intelligent, contemptuous eyes widened, and for the first time they showed an emotion other than malice. It was confusion, morphing rapidly into something else. Something that looked like dawning horror. It looked at the small, soft-skinned creature. And in that quiet, unblinking stare, it saw not a meal but an end. It saw a thing that would chase it across the stars. A thing that would hunt it not for food, but for the challenge. A thing that would simply keep coming and coming and coming until one of them was dead. And it would not be the human. With a shriek that was not a challenge but a cry of pure, primal terror, the Gravripper stumbled backward. It scrambled away, its massive form surprisingly clumsy in its haste. It fled into the deepest part of its canyon and disappeared into the shadows, leaving behind nothing but a stunned, ringing silence. The emergency klaxons that had just begun to blare were cut short. The vibration ceased. The crack in the transparisteel was a silent testament to what had almost happened. Everyone, the students, Instructor Vorlag, Warden Ix, stared at Alex. He slowly lowered his hand from the glass, the intense focus in his eyes softening back into his usual mild placidity. He turned to face the silent, awestruck group. Okay, he said, breaking the silence. I think I'm ready for that gift shop now. The journey back to the academy was a silent affair. The shuttle's hum was the only sound for a long time. The other students didn't just give Alex a wide berth anymore. They treated him with a profound, almost religious reverence. They were no longer seeing the awkward exchange student. They were seeing the creature that had stared down a Gravripper and made it flee in terror. Grak was the first to break the silence. He lumbered down the aisle and stood before Alex's seat. The big Grolian who had been so full of bluster and arrogance now looked humbled. Ryder, he said, his voice a low rumble. He didn't use the derogatory soft skin. He used his name. On my homeworld, the greatest honor a hunter can achieve is to face a great beast and earn its respect through strength. He paused, his gaze full of a new understanding. I do not think you earned that thing's respect. I think you reminded it what it feels like to be prey. He gave a short, formal Grolian bow, a gesture of deep respect, and returned to his seat. Later, as the crystalline spires of the academy came into view, Kaelin sat beside Alex. Her antennae were calm now, no longer twitching with anxiety. When she focused on Alex, the emotional static was gone. The quiet hum was still there, but now she understood it. It was the calm of the deep ocean, powerful and self-assured, with no need to broadcast its strength. We were wrong about you, Alex, she said softly. We were wrong about your whole species. Alex looked out the window at the approaching school. I'm just a guy, Kaelin. I'm studying astrophysics. I like old movies and spicy food. I'm not a monster. No, Kaelin agreed, her multifaceted eyes meeting his. You are not a monster. You are a predator. We have predators on Xylos. They are fast and strong and they kill to eat. But we have never conceived of a creature like you, a predator of predators, a persistence hunter. She hesitated. Xyril has been running simulations. A human, with your species' stamina and intelligence, equipped with even primitive projectile weapons, could theoretically destabilize any known ecosystem in the galaxy. You are the ultimate invasive species. Alex looked down at his hands. They were soft, with blunt nails and no claws. They looked harmless. But he thought about the stories of human history, a long, bloody saga of conquest and expansion, of humanity spreading across its world and dominating every environment, every creature it encountered. They weren't just stories, they were a species resume. Maybe that's why we try so hard to be peaceful now, he said quietly, more to himself than to her. Maybe we're the only thing in the universe that we're truly afraid of. When they disembarked, the atmosphere at the academy had changed. News traveled fast. Whispers followed Alex down the crystal corridors, but they were no longer whispers of ridicule. They were whispers of awe and fear. Students of species that prided themselves on their warrior heritage now stepped aside for him. He was still Alex Ryder, the awkward human. But he was also something more. He was a representative of the quiet apex, the unassuming creature at the top of a food chain so vast and brutal that no one else had ever even conceived of it. His relationship with his classmates was forever altered. He was no longer an outsider to be pitied. He was an enigma to be respected. He had found his place, not by conforming, but by revealing the profound, terrifying truth of what it meant to be human. And as he walked through the alien halls, he carried with him the silent legacy of his ancestors. The calm, steady gaze of the predator that has never known a greater one than itself. The galaxy was full of monsters, but it had just learned that the most dangerous of them all came from a small, quiet, paradise world in Sector 769.